A man rescues a fragile foal from slaughter, but its mysterious pregnancy defies nature. As the grotesque form grows within her, the day of birth brings not a miracle, but a nightmare, leaving everyone paralyzed in horror. Miguel gripped the rusted iron gate with one hand, his knuckles white against the cold metal. The sound of hooves clattering against concrete echoed sharply in the grim air, mingling with the occasional barked commands of the workers. Inside the slaughterhouse, the stench of blood and fear clung like a second skin. The sight hit him harder than he expected. A small, skeletal mare stood trembling in the corner of a holding pen, so young her legs looked barely strong enough to hold her up. Thick welts crisscrossed her dusty coat, and her left ear hung oddly, bent from some old injury. A chain looped cruelly around her thin neck, digging into the skin with every movement. Miguel's chest tightened. The mare's ribs jutted sharply against her hide, and her wide, shimmering eyes held a mix of terror and defiance that pinned him in place. She flinched as a worker barked and jabbed a stick toward her. "What are you staring at?" a gravelly voice barked behind him. Miguel turned to see the slaughterhouse's owner, a burly man with arms as thick as tree trunks and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face. "That one," Miguel said, pointing toward the small mare. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. The man snorted. "That scrawny thing? Ain't worth a sack of feed. You want her, you'd be doing me a favor." Miguel's jaw tightened, anger flaring in his chest. The mare shifted, her gaze flicking toward him again, and that was all it took to push him over the edge. "I'll take her," Miguel said firmly. The man threw his head back and laughed. "You serious? This ain't no charity." "I'm serious," Miguel snapped. "Name your price." The owner rattled off a number, clearly inflated to see if Miguel would back down. He didn't. When the workers dragged the mare out of the pen, her legs buckled momentarily before she scrambled upright again, the chain still around her neck. Miguel stepped forward, pushing the man's hand away, and unfastened the chain himself, his touch as gentle as he could manage. "You're safe now," he murmured, stroking the mare's trembling neck. The small mare flinched but didn't pull away entirely, and Miguel felt a flicker of hope. As the mare was loaded into his trailer, Miguel could feel the slaughterhouse owner's eyes boring into his back, full of disbelief and mockery. But he didn't care. At the farm, Miguel led the mare out of the trailer, speaking softly to her. "You're safe now," he murmured, stroking her neck. He decided then and there to name her Estrella, his little star. She deserved a name that carried hope, a name that symbolized a new beginning. Over the following weeks, Miguel dedicated himself entirely to nursing Estrella back to health. He cleaned the angry welts on her skin, brushing gently over the spots where the chain had dug into her neck. He fed her small portions of oats and hay, careful not to overwhelm her weakened stomach. At night, he sat beside her stall, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. Slowly, her coat began to take on a faint sheen, and she started meeting his touch with cautious nuzzles. But something still wasn't right. Despite her steady appetite and trust growing with each passing day, Estrella remained painfully thin. Her frame was so delicate that Miguel worried a strong gust of wind might topple her. Her legs, while gaining strength, still wobbled more than they should for her age. No matter how well he cared for her, she didn't seem to thrive the way his other horses had. One early morning, as Miguel brushed her down under the soft light of dawn, he sighed deeply. "What's wrong, girl?" he whispered. Estrella turned her head toward him, her wide brown eyes calm but filled with an unsettling question, as if asking him the same thing. Miguel made up his mind then. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Loading her gently into the trailer again, he drove to the clinic of Dr. Felipe, a veterinarian well known throughout the region for his skill with horses. Miguel had only sought Felipe's help once before, years ago, when a prized mare had fallen ill. But the man's reputation had been enough to earn his trust. Felipe greeted him with a brisk professionalism, glancing briefly at Estrella as Miguel explained her condition. "Let's take a look," Felipe said, gesturing toward the examination area. The vet's practiced hands moved methodically over Estrella's body, checking her teeth, listening to her heartbeat, and pressing gently on her sides. Miguel stood by, fists clenched at his sides, his worry growing as Felipe's brow furrowed deeper with each step. Finally, Felipe froze. His fingers lingered on a spot just behind Estrella's ribs, and his professional mask cracked for a moment. "What is it?" Miguel asked, his voice tight. Felipe didn't answer immediately. He palpated the area again, more firmly this time, before straightening and brushing off his hands. His tone was too casual when he finally spoke. "She's malnourished, that's all," he said quickly. "A vitamin deficiency, most likely. Nothing serious." Miguel frowned. "Are you sure?" "She's been eating well, better than some of my other horses, but she's not gaining weight." Felipe's tone sharpened. "Trust me, I've seen this before. Keep feeding her good quality hay and grain, and she'll improve. Leave her here for a few days so I can monitor her closely." Something about Felipe's demeanor didn't sit right with Miguel. "All right," Miguel said reluctantly. "Take good care of her." When Miguel returned 2 days later, Estrella looked brighter. She whinnied softly at the sight of him, her ears pricking forward. Felipe stood nearby, his arms crossed and a faint, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "See? She's already improving," Felipe said, gesturing toward the mare. Miguel ran his hands over Estrella's sides, noting how her coat felt smoother and her eyes looked clearer. Relief washed over him, though a small voice in the back of his mind whispered caution. Something about Felipe's overly confident tone still bothered him. "She looks better," Miguel admitted, but his tone was guarded. "I'll keep a close eye on her." Felipe's smile widened. "Good idea, and remember, patience is key." As Miguel led Estrella back to the trailer, he glanced over his shoulder. Felipe was watching them leave, his expression unreadable. A shiver ran down Miguel's spine, though he couldn't quite place why. A week later, Miguel stood outside the stall with a bucket of feed in one hand. Estrella had only grown stranger in her behavior. She'd taken to stamping her hooves against the wooden floor at night, hard enough to wake him in the house. She chewed at the stall door until the edges splintered, her breathing heavy and erratic. Worst of all, her body was changing in ways Miguel couldn't explain. Her belly had begun to swell, round and tight, in a way that made Miguel's gut twist. At first, he'd thought it was just weight gain, a sign that she was finally recovering. But this looked different. "Pregnant," he whispered under his breath, shaking his head. The thought was absurd. Estrella wasn't even old enough to breed properly. Her growth had been stunted, her body not yet ready for such things. And she'd never been near a stallion, not once since he'd rescued her. It was impossible. Yet the signs were there. Her appetite had become insatiable, and she alternated between restless pacing and long, exhausted stretches, where she lay on the floor of her stall, her breathing shallow. Miguel couldn't deny the truth any longer. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, his grip tightening on the bucket. That night, the restless pacing turned into something far worse. Miguel woke to the sound of frantic whinnying, louder than it had ever been before. He threw on his boots and grabbed a lantern, his heart pounding as he rushed to the barn. When he reached the stall, Estrella was thrashing wildly, her hind legs kicking at the walls with enough force to rattle the boards. Her ears were pinned flat against her head, and foam flecked her muzzle as she threw herself around the confined space. "Whoa! Estrella, calm down!" Miguel shouted, swinging the stall door open and stepping inside. She reared up at the sound of his voice, her hooves slicing the air, and Miguel had to jump back to avoid being struck. His breath caught in his throat as he watched her, panic flooding him. He'd seen fear in animals before, but this was something darker, like she was fighting something inside herself, something she didn't understand. Miguel stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then he grabbed a handful of hay and edged closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice trembling. "It's just me. You're okay." Estrella's eyes locked onto him, her chest heaving with labored breaths. For a moment, she seemed to recognize him, her tense posture softening slightly. Miguel reached out, but as his hand brushed her coat, she shuddered violently and whipped her head away. The next morning, Miguel loaded Estrella into the trailer once again, his mind racing with unanswered questions. When they arrived at the clinic, Felipe greeted them with a brisk nod. Miguel wasted no time explaining everything: the pacing, the thrashing, the swelling belly that shouldn't have been possible. Felipe frowned as he led Estrella into the examination area. He ran his hands over her swollen abdomen, his movements slow and methodical, but Miguel could see the tension in his shoulders. "I told you, she's fine," Felipe said after a long silence. "What you're describing, these behaviors, it's just stress. She's adjusting to her environment. Give her time." Miguel's frustration boiled over. "Stress doesn't make a horse's belly swell like she's about to foal," he snapped. "She hasn't been near a stallion, Felipe. How do you explain that?" Felipe's jaw tightened. "There's nothing wrong with her," he said sharply. "If you don't trust my expertise, then maybe you should handle this yourself." The vet's sudden defensiveness caught Miguel off guard. He stared at Felipe, searching his face for answers, but found only irritation and something else, something darker, like guilt. When they returned to the farm, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that Felipe was hiding something. That night, as he walked toward the barn to check on Estrella, he noticed something strange. In the soft dirt near the stall, there were footprints, human footprints. They circled the barn, their edges smudged but unmistakable. Miguel's skin prickled as he looked around, the quiet of the night suddenly feeling oppressive. "Am I imagining things?" he muttered to himself. But deep down, he knew better. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Miguel leaned against the stall door, his hands gripping the weathered wood so tightly his knuckles turned white. Estrella stood in the middle of the enclosure, her body trembling as if the slightest movement might shatter her. She let out a low, guttural sound that Miguel had never heard before, a mix of pain and fear. He stepped closer, speaking gently. "Easy, girl. It's all right." But when his hand reached for her flank, Estrella recoiled violently, a sharp kick landing dangerously close to his leg. Miguel stumbled backward, his heart racing. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He grabbed his phone and scrolled quickly through his contacts, landing on the name he needed: Camila Ortega. She wasn't just any veterinarian. She was a close friend, someone he'd known for years and trusted without question. She lived in the next town over and had helped Miguel countless times with his other horses. If anyone could figure out what was happening to Estrella, it was her. "Camila," he said when she picked up. his voice tight with worry. "It's Estrella. She's in pain. I don't know what's happening, but I need your help." There was no hesitation on the other end. "I'm on my way," Camilla replied. It wasn't long before the sound of Camilla's truck broke through the tense silence of the night. She stepped out with a weathered bag slung over her shoulder, her expression sharp and focused. Miguel met her halfway, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's been acting strange for days, restless, not sleeping right. But tonight," Miguel's voice cracked, "she's in pain. I don't know what to do." Camilla gave him a reassuring nod. "We'll figure it out," she said, her calm demeanor like a lifeline. Inside the stall, Estrella's head jerked up as Camilla approached. The mare's eyes were wide, the whites showing in stark contrast to her dark coat. Camilla moved slowly, her voice low and soothing. "Hey there, sweet girl. Let's see what's going on." She ran her hands along Estrella's sides, her practiced touch probing for signs of injury. When her fingers pressed against the mare's swollen abdomen, Estrella flinched, her body stiffening. Camilla frowned, then reached for her bag. "I'll need to do an ultrasound," she said, pulling out a portable machine. Miguel's stomach churned as he watched her set up. He had no idea what she was looking for, but the tension in her movements made his heart pound harder. Camilla applied the gel and pressed the probe against Estrella's belly. The machine hummed softly, and then the screen flickered to life. Miguel craned his neck to see, his breath catching when an image began to form. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Camilla didn't answer immediately, her brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted the angle. "Miguel," she finally said, her voice careful, almost disbelieving. "She's pregnant." Miguel blinked, the word hitting him like a physical blow. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. "She's too young. She's never been near a stallion. How could she?" "I don't know," Camilla admitted, her tone laced with unease. She pointed to the screen. "But look." Miguel's eyes locked onto the blurry image. The fetus was there, but it wasn't right. Its shape was distorted, the limbs too long, the head an odd angular shape that sent a chill down his spine. "That doesn't look normal," he said, his voice shaking. "It's not," Camilla replied. She pulled back, removing her gloves. "Miguel, Estrella isn't just a foal, she's fully grown, an adult mare. Her size is the result of a rare condition, something that stunted her physical development. That's why she's always looked small." Miguel stared at her, his mind racing. "So, all this time, I thought she was just a baby." Camilla nodded, her expression softening. "You couldn't have known. But there's more, Miguel. Whatever's happening inside her, it's not natural. That fetus..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's like nothing I've ever seen." Miguel took a shaky breath. "Felipe told me she was fine. He looked at her, ran tests. He said it was just a vitamin deficiency. He didn't mention anything like this." Camilla's expression hardened. "That's strange. If Felipe ran tests, he must have noticed something. There's no way he could have missed this." She paused, then glanced at Miguel. "Miguel, there've been rumors about Felipe. Back in my town, I've heard farmers say they've had problems after working with him. Horses getting sick, some dying for no clear reason. At first, I thought it was just bad luck or gossip. But now..." Her voice trailed off, and Miguel felt his stomach twist. "You're saying he might have known? That he could have done something to her?" "I don't know," Camilla admitted, her tone heavy with doubt. "But it's starting to look that way. And if that's true, we need to figure out why. Miguel stood frozen outside Felipe's clinic, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The usually bustling space was eerily silent. The lights inside dimmed, as if someone had turned off more than just the electricity. He pushed the door open slowly, its creak echoing unnaturally loud in the still air. Inside, the place was a wreck. Shelves were empty, papers scattered across the floor, and the faint smell of disinfectant lingered, mingling with something metallic. Blood, maybe, or chemicals Miguel couldn't name. The examination table where Estrella had stood only days ago was bare, the instruments that had once lined the walls completely gone. Felipe was gone. Miguel's stomach churned as he stepped further into the room, his boots crunching over shattered glass. This wasn't just abandonment. It was flight. Felipe had left in a hurry, taking everything of value and leaving behind only questions. Miguel leaned on the edge of the empty table, gripping it tightly as his mind raced. Felipe knew something. He had to. But what was it? And why would he run? By the time Miguel returned to the farm, his unease had grown into a heavy, suffocating weight. As he led Estrella into her stall, the mare's eyes darted nervously around the barn, mirroring his own unsettled feelings. The next morning, he found himself surrounded by whispers. It started with a neighbor, Mrs. Carpenter, who approached him as he checked the fencing near the road. "Heard about your mare?" she said, her voice low but tinged with a curiosity that made Miguel's skin crawl. "What about her?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Mrs. Carpenter's expression flickered with discomfort, but she pressed on. "Folks are saying she's carrying something unnatural. That maybe it's better you know." Miguel's hands balled into fists at his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. But the whispers didn't stop there. At the market, as he picked up grain, he caught fragments of conversation from behind his back. "Could be dangerous. Heard it's not even a normal horse. Might be his fault." Miguel slammed the bag of grain onto the counter, the force silencing the murmurs for a moment. He paid quickly and left, the weight of their stares burning into his back. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into outright accusations. "They're saying it's you," Camilla told him one evening, her voice quiet but firm as she stood beside him in the barn. "That you did something to her. That you're trying to hide it." Miguel's head snapped up, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "Me? They think I would hurt her?" Camilla placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression full of sympathy. "People are scared, Miguel. They don't understand what's happening, so they're looking for someone to blame." Miguel turned to look at Estrella. The mare was calm for the moment, chewing on a bundle of hay, but her body still bore the strange swelling and her eyes seemed darker than usual, as if they held secrets she couldn't share. "I didn't do anything," he muttered. "She's all I've been trying to protect." "I know," Camilla said softly, "but they won't believe that unless we figure out what's really going on." That night, alone in his small kitchen, Miguel stared at a fading photograph pinned to the wall. It was of him and Santiago, taken years ago after a particularly good harvest. Santiago had been his closest friend, a man with an uncanny way of understanding animals. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Santiago had retreated to the mountains after losing his own farm. But now Miguel felt a tug of desperation. Santiago would know. The next morning, Miguel loaded Estrella into the trailer. The journey to Santiago's remote cabin was long and winding, the roads narrowing as the hills grew steeper. When he finally arrived, the cabin looked just as he remembered, weathered but sturdy, surrounded by towering pines. Santiago emerged as Miguel stepped out of the truck, his face lined with years of hard work and solitude. "Miguel," he greeted, his tone calm but curious. "What brings you here?" Miguel wasted no time. "It's Estrella. Something's wrong with her. I need your help." Santiago's eyes flicked to the trailer, his brow furrowing. "Bring her out," he said simply. As Santiago examined Estrella, his movements slow and deliberate, Miguel recounted everything: the swelling, the whispers, Felipe's disappearance. Santiago listened without interrupting, his hands tracing along Estrella's body with a precision born from years of experience. Finally, he stepped back, his expression grave. "There are marks here," he said, pointing to faint scars along Estrella's neck and belly. "These aren't natural." Miguel frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're too precise, too clean," Santiago explained. "Like something was done to her, something deliberate." Miguel's stomach churned. "Felipe, he must have known. He was the one who treated her first. He said she was fine." Santiago's gaze darkened. "If Felipe knew about this and didn't tell you, there's a reason. And I don't think it's a good one." Miguel felt anger bubbling under his skin. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice tight. Santiago placed a hand on his shoulder. "We start by finding out the truth. But whatever this is, Miguel, you need to be ready. I think it's bigger than either of us realize." As they loaded Estrella back into the trailer, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that Santiago was right. Whatever had been done to his mare wasn't just about her. It was part of something larger, something darker, and Miguel was determined to uncover it. The search for Felipe had yielded nothing. Miguel had combed through the town, asking anyone who might know where the vet had gone. He'd stopped by the clinic one last time, hoping for a sign, something Felipe might have left behind, but the place was as empty as before, like the man had never existed. Felipe's disappearance weighed heavily on Miguel's mind, but there was no time to dwell. Estrella's condition worsened by the day, and her unpredictable behavior kept everyone on edge. Camilla stayed on, working tirelessly to ease the mare's pain, her years of experience barely enough to keep Estrella stable. Santiago, too, remained at the farm, lending his steady hands and quiet wisdom to the chaos. The mare's pregnancy had taken an obvious toll. Her small frame, never built to carry a foal, strained visibly under the weight. The swelling in her belly grew unnatural and disproportionate, and the pain drove Estrella to fits of aggression that left everyone wary. One afternoon, the barn was filled with a commotion so loud it echoed across the fields. Miguel sprinted from the house, his boots slipping in the damp earth. He burst into the barn to find Camilla gripping a lead rope with all her strength, her face tight with concentration as Estrella reared up violently, her hooves slamming against the stall walls. "Get back!" Camilla shouted, her voice sharp but strained. "She's out of control!" Miguel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rope, adding his weight to the effort to steady the mare. Estrella bucked again, pulling them both forward. Miguel's grip faltered for a split second, and that's when it happened. A sharp crack echoed as her hoof connected with his arm, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain seared through his shoulder, but Miguel didn't let go of the rope. With a grunt, he dug his heels into the dirt and pulled hard, forcing Estrella's head down. Camilla seized the moment to loop the rope more securely around the stall post, finally pinning the mare in place. Estrella snorted heavily, her eyes wild, but the fight in her seemed to ebb, replaced by exhaustion. Miguel sat up slowly, wincing as he cradled his arm. "She's getting worse," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of his ragged breathing. Camilla knelt beside him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "You shouldn't have jumped in like that. She could have killed you." "I couldn't just stand there," Miguel replied, grimacing as he tried to move his arm. "What's happening to her, Camilla? Why is she like this?" Camilla didn't answer immediately. She glanced at Estrella, who now stood trembling in her stall, sweat glistening on her coat. "She's in more pain than we thought," she said finally. "And the pregnancy. It's taking too much out of her. She's too small to handle this." Miguel's heart sank. He reached out weakly, his hand brushing against Estrella's flank. "Hang in there, girl," he murmured. By the time the storm rolled in that evening, the air was thick with tension. Thunder growled in the distance, and flashes of lightning lit up the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the fields. Miguel, Santiago, and Camilla worked tirelessly to prepare, setting up lamps and gathering the supplies Camilla said they'd need if Estrella went into labor. The first signs came just as the rain began to fall. Estrella's breathing grew shallow and rapid, her legs buckling as she tried to lie down. Miguel and Santiago helped ease her to the floor, their hands gentle but firm. "She's starting," Camilla said, her voice steady but low. She crouched beside Estrella, her hands moving expertly over the mare's distended belly. Miguel hovered close, his eyes darting between Estrella and Camilla. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked, the words heavy with worry. Camilla didn't look up. "It's not going to be easy. The foal's position is all wrong." Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled through the cracks in the barn, and rain hammered against the roof like an angry drumbeat. Santiago lit another lantern, his expression unreadable as he knelt beside Estrella's head, whispering softly to her in Spanish. "Stay with us, Estrella," he murmured. "You're stronger than this pain. You can do it." Hours passed, each one more grueling than the last. Estrella's cries of pain filled the barn, mingling with the sounds of the storm. Miguel's hands were raw from gripping her bridle, his voice hoarse from murmuring reassurances. Then, as the storm reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. The faint glow Miguel had noticed before, the strange ethereal light that seemed to pulse beneath Estrella's skin, grew brighter. It spread along her sides, illuminating the intricate patterns hidden in her coat. The light danced and shimmered, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to push back the shadows. "What is that?" Miguel breathed, his eyes wide. Santiago didn't answer immediately. He stared at the glowing patterns, his face a mix of awe and recognition. "It's a sign," he said finally. "I've seen drawings like this in old books, symbols tied to life, renewal, and protection." Camilla's sharp voice cut through their wonder. "Focus! She's not out of danger yet." Miguel snapped back to the present, gripping Estrella's bridle tightly once more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the foal was born. It tumbled to the ground, slick and fragile, but alive. Miguel held his breath as Camilla worked quickly to clear its airway and ensure it was breathing. When she stepped back, Miguel and Santiago moved closer, their eyes widening at what they saw. The foal's coat shimmered faintly, intricate patterns glowing softly under the lantern light. Its eyes, wide and curious, seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond its age. Miguel reached out a trembling hand, brushing against the foal's damp coat. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Santiago placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't just any foal, Miguel. It's something extraordinary. A bridge between nature and whatever Felipe's experiments have done." Outside, The storm began to ease, the rain softening to a gentle patter. But inside the barn, a new storm was brewing, one Miguel knew they'd face together. The morning after the storm, the air was thick with dampness, the barn still holding the scent of rain-soaked hay and sweat. Camila and Miguel worked side by side, their movements deliberate but heavy with exhaustion. Estrella stood quietly, her sides still heaving slightly, but her eyes held a calmness that had been missing for weeks. At her side, the newborn foal nestled close, its coat shimmering faintly in the filtered sunlight that seeped through the barn slats. Miguel wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "She's looking better today," he murmured, more to himself than to Camila. Camila nodded, her focus on cleaning a shallow scrape on Estrella's flank. "She's strong," she said, her voice low but steady. "But this little one's going to be a handful." She glanced at the foal, who seemed to be watching her with an unsettling intensity. "You see how it looks at you, like it's trying to figure you out." Miguel chuckled softly, though there was an uneasiness in his laugh. "It's got its mother's fire." Before Camila could respond, the barn door flew open with a loud bang. Both of them turned, startled, to see Santiago rushing in, his face set with grim determination. "Miguel," he called, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. "I've got news." Miguel stood straight, his heart pounding as Santiago approached. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tense. Santiago hesitated for only a moment before launching into his explanation. "I reached out to a friend of mine, retired now, but he used to work with law enforcement. He had some contacts who've been keeping tabs on Felipe." Miguel exchanged a quick glance with Camila before asking, "And?" "And Felipe's not just some run-of-the-mill vet," Santiago said, his tone dark. "He's been involved in genetic experiments for years. He was targeting animals with unique conditions, like your mare. Her growth issues. He saw that as an opportunity." Miguel felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean, opportunity?" he demanded. Santiago's jaw tightened. He was experimenting, Miguel, splicing genes, altering DNA to see what would happen. Estrella's condition made her the perfect candidate, because her physiology was already different. He thought it would increase his chances of success. Camila let out a sharp breath. "Success for what?" she asked, her voice sharp. "To create something new," Santiago replied, his voice heavy. "Something that could be studied, replicated, maybe even controlled." Before anyone could say more, the sound of tires crunching over gravel reached their ears. Miguel moved to the barn door, peering out to see a pair of black SUVs pulling up the driveway. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the lead vehicle, his expression professional but unreadable. "Who's that?" Miguel asked, his voice wary. "That would be the feds," Santiago said grimly. "I told my contact what we found, and he passed it up the chain." The man approached, his gaze scanning the barn before settling on Miguel. "Mr. Rivera?" he asked. Miguel nodded, stepping forward. "That's me." "I'm Agent Carter with the Federal Investigation Division," the man said, pulling out a badge. "We've been tracking Felipe for some time now. We believe you and your mare might be critical to our case." Miguel felt his stomach twist. "Felipe's been conducting illegal genetic experiments on animals," Carter explained. "We've been piecing together evidence from various farms and clinics he's worked with. Your mare, Estrella, is one of the few survivors." Camila stepped forward, her voice firm. "What about the foal?" she asked. "Is it safe?" Carter's gaze shifted to the shimmering creature beside Estrella. "We don't know yet," he admitted, "but it's clear this foal represents something Felipe was trying to create." Miguel's temper flared. "You're saying he did this to her? To them?" And now you want to treat them like experiments too? Carter held up a placating hand. No one's taking your animals, Mr. Rivera. We're here to ensure Felipe faces justice, and that this doesn't happen to anyone else. The agents spent hours gathering samples, documenting the marks on Estrella's body, and photographing the foal's unusual features. Through it all, Miguel stayed close, his presence a silent reminder that he wasn't going to let anyone take his animals from him. By the time the agents left, the sun was dipping low on the horizon. Miguel leaned against the barn door, watching their taillights disappear into the distance. "They'll lock him up," Santiago said quietly, standing beside him. "But that doesn't fix what he's done." "No, it doesn't," Miguel agreed, his voice hard. "But I'll make sure Estrella and her foal have the life they deserve. No one's ever going to use them again." Camila joined them, her expression softening as she looked at Miguel. "You're doing the right thing," she said, "and they're lucky to have you." Miguel glanced back into the barn where Estrella stood protectively over her foal. "No," he said softly, "I'm the lucky one." That night, Miguel sat in the quiet of the barn, watching as Estrella nuzzled her foal. The quiet days that followed the investigators' visit seemed almost surreal, as though their presence had been nothing but a passing storm. No lingering questions, no further interruptions. Life at the farm returned to its routine, at least on the surface. Miguel had named the foal Sol, a fitting tribute to the way the young horse's shimmering coat seemed to catch the sunlight in patterns that moved like waves. Over the weeks, Sol grew strong, his frame maturing into one of elegance and power. His body hinted at his mother's lineage, but bore a distinct, almost otherworldly grace. Despite his size, Sol remained fiercely attached to Estrella. The mare, still small and fragile compared to her son, never seemed to mind his constant shadow. Sol would nuzzle her gently, as if reassuring himself that she was there, a tether to the world that had begun to take notice of him in ways Miguel hadn't anticipated. It was Sol's intelligence that stood out the most. He responded to Miguel's commands with a quickness that defied explanation, sometimes performing tasks before Miguel could even give the word. It wasn't just his sharpness, though. It was his connection to people. Miguel first noticed it when he'd had a particularly rough day. The weight of the farm's responsibilities, combined with lingering anger over Felipe's betrayal, had left him drained. As he leaned against the barn door, Sol approached, his large eyes studying Miguel with an intensity that felt almost human. "You're something else, aren't you?" Miguel murmured, scratching behind Sol's ears. To his surprise, Sol pressed his muzzle against Miguel's chest, a quiet reassurance that sent a chill down his spine. The night it happened, Miguel was in a deep sleep. He awoke to the unmistakable sound of chaos in the barn, hooves stomping, panicked neighs, and something else, the creak of wood splintering under strain. Miguel's heart leapt into his throat. He grabbed his flashlight and fumbled for his boots, his hands trembling as he dialed Camila's number. "Camila," he said, breathless. "Something's happening in the barn. You need to get here. Now." "I'm on my way," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency. Without waiting for more, Miguel bolted toward the barn, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The sounds grew louder as he approached, each step tightening the knot in his stomach. When he reached the doors, he hesitated for a moment, steeling himself before pushing them open. The scene before him stopped him cold. Felipe. The man stood in the center of the barn, his hands outstretched as if to calm the animals. But the effect was the opposite. Estrella reared back, her eyes wide with terror, while Sol circled protectively, his powerful legs kicking out at Felipe's attempts to get close. "Felipe!" Miguel shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What the hell are you doing here?" Felipe turned, his face a mask of cold determination. "Miguel, you don't understand," he said, his voice measured, but laced with a fervor that sent a chill down Miguel's spine. "I have to finish what I started." "Finish what?" Miguel demanded, stepping closer. "You've done enough. Look at them. They're terrified." "They're not terrified," Felipe countered, his tone shifting to something almost condescending. "They're extraordinary. You can't comprehend the significance of what they are. Sul is proof of what can be achieved when science and nature work together. He's the future." "You're insane," Miguel spat. "You used Estrella, you lied to me, and now you think you can come back here and claim them?" Felipe's eyes darkened. "This isn't about ownership. This is about progress. You should be thanking me, Miguel. Without me, none of this would exist." Miguel's anger boiled over, and he took another step forward. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Felipe sneered. "You think you can stop me?" The vet lunged, catching Miguel off guard. The two men crashed to the ground, the flashlight skittering across the barn floor. Miguel struggled against Felipe's weight, his fists swinging wildly in an attempt to gain the upper hand. "You're a fool," Felipe growled, pinning Miguel's arm. "You're clinging to ignorance while I'm trying to change the world." Miguel gritted his teeth, using all his strength to shove Felipe off. "You're not changing the world, you're destroying it," he snarled, throwing a punch that connected with Felipe's jaw. The fight escalated, both men grappling with a ferocity born of their opposing convictions. But then, Felipe pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade catching the dim light. Miguel froze for a split second, his heart racing. But before Felipe could make his move, Sul charged. The young stallion's hooves struck with precision, knocking the knife from Felipe's hand and sending him sprawling to the ground. Miguel scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving as he grabbed the flashlight. Felipe tried to get up, but Estrella stepped forward, her small frame a stark contrast to the defiance in her stance. She bared her teeth and stomped the ground, blocking Felipe's path. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder. Camila had kept her word, and the authorities were on their way. Felipe glared at Miguel, his expression a mix of rage and resignation. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," Miguel replied, his voice steady. "The only thing I regret is ever trusting you." As the police arrived, Felipe was subdued and taken away, his protests drowned out by the relief that washed over Miguel. He turned to Sol and Estrella, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You saved me," he said softly, his voice cracking. "You saved us." Sul stepped forward, his head bowing as if to acknowledge Miguel's words. The news of Felipe's arrest spread quickly, stirring a mixture of relief and unease throughout the community. Though the authorities had cleared Miguel of any wrongdoing, whispers lingered. Questions about the foal, Sol, and what he might become hung in the air like an unspoken threat. For days, Miguel kept to himself, tending to Estrella and Sol with a quiet determination that masked the storm of emotions within him. One morning, Camila and Santiago joined Miguel at the kitchen table, their faces somber but resolved. Santiago set down a folder filled with notes and photographs, evidence gathered by the investigators. "They've revealed everything," Santiago began, his voice steady but low. "Felipe's Du an Estrella wasn't just about Estrella. He was trying to prove he could create something new, something superior." Camila added, "But what matters now is showing people that Sol isn't dangerous. They're scared, Miguel. They've seen too many things they don't understand, and fear makes people cruel." Miguel nodded slowly. "So, What do we do? We bring them here, Camilla said. We show them the truth. A week later, Miguel's farm bustled with activity as neighbors and townsfolk arrived for the meeting he'd arranged. Santiago had helped him prepare a large open area near the barn, setting up benches and a modest platform where they could speak. Miguel's stomach churned with nerves as the crowd grew, their murmurs a mix of curiosity and lingering suspicion. As the gathering began, Miguel stepped forward, flanked by Camilla and Santiago. He cleared his throat, his voice steady, despite the weight of so many eyes on him. "Thank you all for coming," he started. "I know there's been a lot of talk about Estrella and Sul, and I don't blame anyone for being cautious. But today, I want to share their story, our story, and show you what they mean to me, to us." Miguel paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Estrella came to me as a frightened, battered mare, and she taught me about resilience. Sul, her son, was born out of something I didn't understand at first, but he's shown me that even in the strangest circumstances there's beauty and hope." Santiago took the stage next, his presence calm and commanding. He held up a large sketch of the glowing symbols that adorned Sul's coat, their intricate patterns mesmerizing the audience. "These symbols," he explained, "are not random. They match designs found in ancient carvings and stories from our region. They've always been linked to balance, renewal, and harmony between nature and mankind." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some leaning closer to study the drawings. Santiago continued, "Sol is not a monster. He's a bridge, proof that nature and humanity can work together even when it's unexpected or unplanned." The moment everyone had been waiting for came when Miguel led Sol into the clearing, the young stallion moving with a grace and intelligence that silenced the murmurs. The sunlight caught the faint shimmer of his coat, the symbols glowing softly in the afternoon light. Sul paused in the center, his gaze sweeping the crowd with an almost unnerving calm. Miguel held his breath, unsure of how the crowd would react. But then, Sul stepped forward, nuzzling a child who had wandered to the edge of the group. The boy giggled, his small hand stroking Sul's nose. His laughter broke the tension, and soon others approached, hesitant but curious. Sul remained calm, his demeanor gentle as he allowed them to touch his coat and marvel at the symbols. "He's amazing," someone whispered, the words carrying a tone of awe. As the sun dipped lower, Miguel found himself surrounded by neighbors who, only days before, had avoided him. Mrs. Carpenter, the same woman who had once spread rumors about Sul, approached with an apologetic smile. "I misjudged you," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "And him. I'm sorry, Miguel." Miguel gave her a small nod, the weight on his chest easing slightly. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." In the days that followed, the farm became a place of quiet inspiration. Families visited often, bringing their children to see Sol and hear Miguel's story. Camila and Santiago helped organize workshops, teaching the community about animals and the importance of understanding what they didn't yet know. Sol, now a symbol of hope and unity, continued to grow. His intelligence and emotional sensitivity amazed everyone who met him, and he seemed to understand his role in the community's healing. For Miguel, the transformation was more personal. As he watched Estrella and Sul graze peacefully under the fading light of day, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The pain and chaos of the past had shaped them all, but it hadn't broken them. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Miguel stood at the edge of the pasture. Estrella and Sol stood nearby, their silhouettes framed by the glowing horizon. "You've come a long way," Camilla said, joining him. "We all have," Miguel replied. But it feels like the start of something, not the end. Camila smiled. That's because it is. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Miguel placed a hand on Estrella's mane and another on Sol's neck. Together, they faced the future, unbroken and full of hope. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me until the end of this incredible story. I hope you're as moved by it as I was while creating it. Now, let me be clear. This story isn't real. It's a work of fiction, but one that carries so much meaning and depth that it feels like it could be. At its heart, this story isn't just about a mare and her extraordinary foal. It's about resilience, compassion, and the lengths we go to protect those we care about. Miguel's journey reminds us that even in the face of fear and doubt, whether it's from the world around us or our own uncertainties, love and determination can create something truly beautiful. Estrella, broken and scared, found hope and healing in Miguel's care, and her son, Sol, became a symbol of renewal and harmony. Their story challenges us to rethink what we fear and to embrace the unknown, not as something to control, but as something to learn from. It's a powerful reminder that humanity's true strength lies in its ability to nurture, protect, and connect. And let's not forget the deeper message here. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Miguel faced betrayal, isolation, and even danger, but he stayed true to his values and found peace not just for himself, but for his community. So, what about you? What lessons did you take away from this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did it inspire you? Challenge you? Or maybe it just gave you a fresh perspective on compassion and courage? Let me know. I can't wait to read your insights. Thank you for being here, and until next time, take care and keep spreading kindness.